Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Science channel. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day, maybe your mind has been racing through thoughts and to-do lists, or maybe you're simply the kind of person who finds comfort in falling asleep to gentle stories about the natural world rather than staring at the ceiling. Whatever brought you here, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're going to wander together through the forest. Not the Chinese letter of hurried hikes or weekend camping trips, but the deeper forest, the one that exists in twilight and shadow, in root systems that stretch for miles beneath your feet, in the slow conversations between trees that have stood for centuries. We're going to explore the quiet mysteries that unfold when sunlight filters through a canopy, the ancient rhythms that pulse through bark and soil, and the gentle science that reveals forests to be far more alive, far more connected, and far more magical than we ever imagined. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to stay awake for every word. This isn't a test, and there's no pressure here. Just let the facts wash over you like dappled light through leaves, like the soft sound of wind moving through branches. Some will stay with you, others will help guide you into sleep, and that's exactly as it should be. Before we step into the woods together, if you're enjoying this journey, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and maybe leave a like. It helps others find their way here too, to this quiet corner of the internet where science becomes a lullaby. But no pressure at all. Just settle in, get comfortable, adjust your pillow, and let your breathing slow. The forest is patient. It's been waiting millions of years. It can wait for you to get cozy. Tonight you're safe. You're exactly where you belong. And the forest has so many secrets to share with you, so many gentle truths that remind us how small and how connected we all are in this beautiful, breathing world. So take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop, and let's walk together into the green silence, where every fact is a footstep on a soft moss path leading you deeper into rest. The air inside a forest can contain hundreds of chemical compounds released by trees, and many of these airborne molecules may actually boost your immune system when you breathe them in. The Japanese call this practice Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, and it's not about hugging trees or performing rituals, just simply being present in the woods. When you walk among cedars, pines, or oaks, you're breathing in phytoncides, organic compounds that trees release to protect themselves from insects and decay. These same compounds, when inhaled by humans, can increase the activity of natural killer cells in our bodies, those vigilant guardians that help defend us against illness. Imagine that, the forest breathing out its own protection, and in breathing it in, we become a little stronger, a little more fortified, simply by standing still beneath the branches. And forests are never truly silent, even when they seem to be holding their breath. If you sit quietly in the woods at dawn or dusk, you'll notice the soundscape shifts in layers, in subtle waves. There's the rustle of small creatures moving through underbrush, the creak of branches adjusting to temperature changes, the distant call of a bird settling in for the night. But beneath all that, there's something even quieter, the sound of growth itself. Scientists have recorded the ultrasonic clicks and pops that plant roots make as they grow through soil, stretching and expanding in their slow underground journey. It's a language we can't hear with our naked ears, but it's there, constant and patient, the whisper of life insisting on continuing, root by root, inch by inch, in a rhythm older than any human song. Beneath your feet, if you're standing in a forest, there's an entire world woven together in a network so complex it resembles the neural pathways in your own brain. This is the mycorrhizal network, sometimes called the wood wide web, where fungal threads connect tree roots to one another across vast distances. Through these thread-like highways, trees can share water, carbon, nitrogen, and even warning signals about insect attacks or drought. A mother tree, often the largest and oldest in a grove, can recognize her own offspring and send them extra nutrients through the fungal network, giving her saplings a better chance at survival in the shaded understory. It's a kind of forest kinship, a community that communicates in chemical whispers through the dark soil, proving that cooperation, not just competition, shapes the world beneath the canopy. Some trees can live for thousands of years, and when you stand beside one, you're standing beside a living archive of history. Bristlecone pines in California and Nevada can exceed 5,000 years, meaning they were already ancient when the pyramids were being built, already weathered and wise when humans were just beginning to record their stories in writing. These trees don't grow fast. They don't reach for the sky in a hurry. They endure harsh winds, freezing temperatures, and long droughts by growing slowly, conserving energy, adding just a thin ring of growth each year. In their gnarled branches and twisted trunks, you can read the story of patience itself, of resilience measured not in days or years but in millennia. There's something deeply comforting in knowing that some living things simply refuse to rush. Forests shape the weather, not just in their immediate vicinity but across entire continents. Through a process called transpiration, trees pull water up from the soil through their roots and release it as vapor through tiny pores in their leaves. A single large oak can transpire over 40,000 gallons of water in a year, sending all that moisture back into the atmosphere where it forms clouds, generates rain, and cools the air. When you cut down vast stretches of forest, you don't just lose trees, you lose the rain itself. The Amazon rainforest, for example, creates roughly half of its own rainfall through this process. The trees breathe out the water that falls back down on them, a cycle so intimate and interconnected that the forest is, in a sense, watering itself, sustaining itself through its own breath, its own living rhythm. And in the autumn, when leaves turn gold and crimson and slowly drift to the forest floor, they're not simply dying. They're beginning a transformation. Those fallen leaves become food for an entire universe of decomposers: fungi, bacteria, beetles, earthworms, millipedes. These tiny laborers break down the leaves into rich humus, returning nutrients to the soil so that new growth can emerge in spring. Nothing in the forest is wasted. Every ending is also a beginning. Every death feeds new life. The leaf that falls in October becomes the soil that nourishes a seedling in April. It's a cycle of renewal so elegant, so efficient, that it's been running without interruption for hundreds of millions of years, long before humans arrive to witness it. And it will continue long after we're gone, patient and eternal as the turning of seasons. Walk into a forest during a rainstorm and you'll notice the scent changes, becomes richer, earthier, almost sweet. That smell has a name, petrichor, and it comes from oils that plants release into the soil during dry periods. When rain finally falls, it stirs up these oils along with a compound called geosmin, produced by soil-dwelling bacteria. The result is that fresh, grounding aroma that makes you want to breathe deeply. That reminds you of childhood and renewal, and the simple truth that water brings life. It's one of the most universally loved scents on earth, and it's the forest's way of celebrating the return of rain, of welcoming the moisture that everything depends on, from the tallest redwood to the smallest microbe hidden in the duff. Trees don't just grow upward toward the light, they also grow outward, and they communicate their needs through their growth patterns. If a tree is stressed by drought, it produces narrower growth rings. If it's thriving, the rings are wider, more generous. Scientists can read these rings like pages in a book, learning about past climates, ancient droughts, and years of abundance. In some cases, tree rings have helped historians date wooden structures, have revealed volcanic eruptions that cooled the planet centuries ago, have told us stories about ecosystems that no longer exist. Each ring is a year of life, a memory written in wood, and when you see a cross-section of an ancient tree, you're looking at time itself, layer by layer, preserved in cellulose and lignin, waiting to be read by anyone patient enough to study its subtle patterns. Forests can influence the formation of clouds not just through releasing water vapor, but by releasing tiny particles called aerosols. These microscopic bits of organic matter serve as seeds around which water vapor condenses, forming cloud droplets. Some researchers believe that forests essentially make their own clouds, creating conditions that bring rain back to themselves. The aerosols can travel great distances on wind currents, meaning a forest in one region might influence rainfall hundreds of miles away. It's a reminder that ecosystems are not isolated islands, but part of a breathing, interconnected planetary system, where what happens in one forest echoes across mountains and oceans, where the chemistry of a single tree can ripple outward and touch the sky itself. In the forest, time moves differently. A tree doesn't hurry. It doesn't rush toward goals or worry about deadlines. It simply grows, season after season, responding to sunlight and water and the turning of the earth. For humans, stepping into a forest can offer a kind of temporal refuge, a place where the frantic pace of modern life slows to the speed of sap rising through cambium, to the gradual unfurling of a fern frond in spring. Studies have shown that spending time in forests can reduce stress hormones, lower blood pressure, and quiet the parts of the brain associated with rumination and worry. The forest doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't ask you to be productive or efficient. It simply invites you to be present, to notice the small things, to remember that you, too, are part of nature's unhurried rhythm. Some trees can clone themselves, creating entire forests from a single genetic individual. Aspen groves, for example, often share a single root system. What looks like a forest of separate trees is actually one enormous organism, connected underground, sharing resources and information. The largest known organism on Earth is a grove of quaking aspens in Utah called Pando, which covers over 100 acres and weighs an estimated 6 million kilograms. Pando has been alive for thousands of years, possibly tens of thousands, making it one of the oldest living things on the planet. When you walk through an aspen grove and hear the leaves trembling in the wind, that soft rattling sound, you're hearing the voice of one vast, ancient being, expressing itself through thousands of trunks, each one a note in a long, slow song. And forests hold water like sponges, moderating floods and droughts. The soil in a healthy forest is rich with organic matter, full of spaces and channels created by roots and burrowing creatures. When rain falls, the forest absorbs it, holds it, releases it slowly into streams and aquifers over weeks and months. Clear-cut a forest, and the rain rushes over bare soil, eroding it, carrying sediment into rivers, causing floods downstream. The forest is the land's memory of water, a living reservoir that smooths out the extremes, that turns sudden downpours into steady, reliable flow. Without forests, rivers become erratic, unpredictable. With them, the landscape breathes evenly, water moving through the system like blood through veins, nourishing everything it touches with patient, steady generosity. When a tree is wounded by a storm or an insect or an animal scraping off bark, it doesn't simply endure the damage passively. Trees have an immune system of sorts. They produce resins and chemical compounds that seal off the wound, preventing infection and decay from spreading into healthy tissue. Pines and spruces ooze sticky sap that hardens over cuts, creating a protective barrier. Some trees even release distress signals, airborne chemicals that warn neighboring trees of danger, prompting them to ramp up their own defenses before the threat arrives. The forest is always watching, always listening in its slow, chemical way, always preparing, always healing. A scar on a tree is not a sign of weakness, but of survival, of resilience, of the quiet determination to keep living despite whatever the world throws at you. Light in a forest is layered, filtered, distributed across different heights and intensities. At the top of the canopy, the emergent layer, trees bask in full sunlight, their crowns competing for every photon. Below them, the canopy layer forms a green ceiling, letting through only dappled, shifting light. Beneath that, the understory is cooler, shadier, home to smaller trees and shrubs adapted to low light. And at the forest floor, only about 2% of sunlight reaches through, creating a dim, twilight world where ferns and mosses and fungi thrive in the near darkness. Each layer has its own community of plants, insects, birds, and mammals, each adapted to their particular stripe of light. The forest, in this way, is not one habitat but many stacked on top of one another, a vertical city of life where every floor has its own rhythm, its own residence, its own quiet dramas unfolding in the shadows. Some trees have relationships with specific animals that go beyond simple predator and prey or pollinator and flower. Acacia trees in Africa, for instance, have evolved a partnership with ants. The tree provides hollow thorns for the ants to live in and produces nectar to feed them. In return, the ants aggressively defend the tree from herbivores, attacking anything that tries to eat the leaves. It's a mutualism so finely tuned that neither can thrive without the other. The tree shapes itself to house an army, and the army dedicates itself to protecting its fortress. Such relationships remind us that evolution doesn't always favor the fiercest or the strongest, but often the most cooperative, the most creative, the ones willing to form alliances that benefit everyone involved. Mosses and lichens, those quiet pioneers, are often the first to colonize bare rock or a fallen log. They ask for almost nothing, just a bit of moisture, a hint of light, and they begin their patient work of breaking down surfaces, creating the first thin layer of soil that other plants will eventually colonize. Lichens, which are actually a symbiosis between fungi and algae or cyanobacteria, can survive in some of the harshest environments on Earth: Arctic tundra, scorching deserts, high mountain peaks. In forests, they drape themselves over branches like delicate lace, filtering nutrients from rain and mist, growing at a pace so slow it's measured in millimeters per year. They don't shout for attention. They don't demand recognition. They simply persist, year after year, century after century, building the foundation upon which more flamboyant life can flourish. Birdsong in the forest is not random noise but a carefully orchestrated communication system. Each species has its own songs and calls, used to attract mates, defend territory, or warn of predators. During the dawn chorus, when dozens of species sing at once in overlapping waves, the forest becomes a cathedral of sound, each bird adding its voice to a symphony that has been performed every morning for millions of years. Some birds learn their songs from their parents, passing down regional dialects from generation to generation. Others are born knowing their music instinctively, their brains hardwired with melodies older than recorded history. To walk through a forest at sunrise and hear that chorus is to be reminded that you are not alone, that life is abundant and vocal, and unafraid to announce its presence to anyone willing to listen. And then there are the mycorrhizal fungi themselves, those underground allies that connect tree roots into networks. These fungi are ancient, their lineage stretching back over 400 million years. They were here long before flowering plants, long before grasses or ferns. In fact, scientists believe it was the partnership between fungi and early land plants that allowed plants to colonize the continents in the first place, that allowed life to leave the oceans and take root on bare stone. Without fungi, there might be no forests, no trees, no wooden shelter for any of the countless species that depend on them. The forest is, in a very real sense, built on fungal threads, held together by relationships invisible to the eye but utterly essential, a hidden architecture supporting every leaf, every branch, every breath of oxygen the trees give us. You're doing beautifully. There's no need to hold on to every detail, no need to keep your eyes open if they're feeling heavy. The forest doesn't mind if you drift for a moment, if your attention wanders like light moving through leaves. Just breathe softly, in and out, and let these stories wash over you. You're safe here. The forest has been standing for a long time, and it will keep standing, patient and still, while you rest. Let your body sink a little deeper into comfort. There's no rush, no urgency. We'll continue walking this gentle path together, one quiet fact at a time, for as long as you'd like to listen. Dead trees, standing or fallen, are some of the most biodiverse habitats in the forest. A snag, a dead tree still standing upright, provides homes for woodpeckers, owls, bats, and countless insects. As it decays, fungi and bacteria move in, softening the wood, breaking it down into nutrients that will eventually feed the soil. A single fallen log can support hundreds of species over the decades it takes to decompose fully, becoming what ecologists call a nurse log, a structure that shelters seedlings, retains moisture, and slowly transforms into the earth itself. In this way, death in the forest is never an ending but a transition, a slow gift given back to the community, a final act of generosity from a tree that has stood watch for decades or centuries. Forests have their own microclimates, pockets of temperature and humidity that differ from the surrounding landscape. Step into a forest on a hot summer day and you'll feel the temperature drop, sometimes by 10 or 15 degrees. The canopy shades the ground, preventing the sun from baking the soil. The trees release moisture through transpiration, humidifying the air. Wind is slowed by trunks and branches, creating a stillness that feels almost sacred. These microclimates provide refuge not just for humans seeking shade, but for countless species that couldn't survive in the harsher conditions outside the forest. The woods create their own weather, their own gentle bubble of coolness and moisture, a shelter within a shelter, endlessly renewing itself through the simple acts of growing and breathing. Some forests are so old, so undisturbed, that they're classified as old growth or primary forests, ecosystems that have never been logged or significantly altered by humans. These forests have a character all their own. Massive trees with trunks wider than cars, a thick layer of duff on the ground, an abundance of dead wood in various stages of decay, and a complex vertical structure with multiple canopy layers. Old-growth forests support far more biodiversity than younger, managed forests. They store more carbon, filter more water, and provide habitat for species that can't live anywhere else. To walk through an old-growth forest is to step into a world that operates on a timescale beyond human comprehension, where change is measured in centuries, where patience is the defining characteristic of survival. Certain trees, like willows and poplars, can reproduce not just through seeds but by simply breaking off a branch. If a branch falls into water or moist soil, it can take root and grow into an entirely new tree, a genetic copy of the parent. This is called vegetative reproduction, and it's a remarkably efficient strategy for colonizing riverbanks and wetlands where conditions change rapidly. A single tree can create an entire grove of clones, all genetically identical, all working together to stabilize soil and slow erosion. There's something almost magical about it, the idea that a piece of wood that looks dead can suddenly sprout roots and leaves, can transform from debris into a living, growing thing. Proof that life in the forest is endlessly inventive, endlessly opportunistic, always finding a way to continue. Bark is not just a protective layer but a whole world unto itself. It's home to insects, lichens, mosses, and even tiny invertebrates that spend their entire lives in the crevices and folds of a single tree's exterior. Some bark is smooth, some is deeply furrowed, some peels off in papery layers. Each texture serves a purpose. Thick bark protects against fire, cork-like bark insulates against temperature extremes, peeling bark sheds parasites and fungi, and bark is surprisingly diverse. The pale white bark of birch trees reflects sunlight, preventing the trunk from overheating. The reddish bark of redwoods contains tannins that resist rot and insect damage. If you run your hand over the bark of different trees, You're touching a library of evolutionary solutions, each one refined over millions of years to solve specific problems, each one a small masterpiece of adaptation. And then there's the phenomenon of massed years, when entire forests produce enormous quantities of seeds all at once. Oaks, beeches, and other trees coordinate their fruiting, sometimes going several years with low seed production, then suddenly releasing a superabundance of acorns or beechnuts in a single autumn. This strategy overwhelms the animals that eat seeds, like squirrels and jays, ensuring that even after they've eaten their fill and cached thousands more for winter, plenty of seeds remain to germinate. Scientists aren't entirely sure how trees coordinate massed years, but it may involve weather cues, chemical signals, or simply a shared rhythm among trees of the same species. It's a reminder that forests operate as communities, making collective decisions that benefit the whole, that the trees aren't isolated individuals but members of a network, participants in a strategy larger than any single trunk or root system. In tropical rainforests, the canopy is so dense that a raindrop can take 10 minutes to fall from a leaf at the top to the ground far below, bouncing from branch to branch, leaf to leaf, losing momentum with each collision. By the time the water reaches the forest floor, the torrential downpour has been transformed into a gentle mist, soft enough that the soil isn't eroded, that delicate seedlings aren't battered by the force of falling water. The forest, in this way, cushions even the rain, turns violence into gentleness, protects itself through its own layered architecture. It's a kind of self-care on a grand scale, a structure so thoughtfully designed by evolution that it can take the sky's fury and turn it into a whisper. Tree roots are astonishingly strong, capable of breaking through rock over time. They don't smash their way through like a hammer. Instead, they grow slowly into cracks, then expand, gradually widening the fissures until solid stone splits apart. This process, repeated over decades and centuries, is one of the ways forests contribute to soil formation. The roots also secrete acids that chemically weather the rock, dissolving minerals and making them available to plants. In this patient, relentless way, trees turn mountains into soil, turn the bones of the earth into the substance of life. It's geology at the pace of biology, a collaboration between the living and the non-living that has shaped landscapes since plants first moved onto land. Some animals are so specialized for forest life that they've evolved to live nowhere else. The three-toed sloth of Central and South America, for example, spends nearly its entire life in the canopy, moving so slowly that algae grows on its fur, camouflaging it among the leaves. The sloth's slow metabolism allows it to survive on a diet of leaves, which provide very little energy. It descends to the forest floor only once a week to defecate, a risky journey for an animal so vulnerable on the ground. Yet this behavior may serve a purpose. By fertilizing the base of its favorite trees, the sloth ensures those trees stay healthy, which in turn ensures it has food. Even in its slowness, even in its seeming helplessness, the sloth is part of the forest's intricate web, giving back to the ecosystem that sustains it. Forests influence the carbon cycle in profound ways. Through photosynthesis, trees pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and lock it away in their wood, their roots, and the soil beneath them. An acre of mature forest can store several tons of carbon, removing it from the air where it contributes to climate change and storing it safely in solid, living form. When forests are cut down and burned, that carbon is released back into the atmosphere all at once, which is why deforestation is such a major driver of global warming. But a growing, healthy forest is a carbon sink, quietly absorbing more carbon than it releases, breathing in our excess and holding it in its tissues like a gift, like a service performed without expectation of thanks, year after year, as long as the trees are allowed to stand. Fungi can glow in the dark. Bioluminescent mushrooms found in forests around the world emit a soft greenish light from their gills or caps, especially at night. The light is produced by a chemical reaction, similar to the one that makes fireflies glow. Scientists believe the light may attract insects, which then help spread fungal spores, or it may simply be a byproduct of the fungus's metabolism. Whatever the reason, the result is enchanting. A forest floor dotted with tiny glowing points, like stars fallen from the sky, like lanterns left by invisible travelers. To stumble upon bioluminescent fungi at night is to be reminded that the forest is full of small magics, small wonders that don't announce themselves but simply exist, quiet and radiant, for anyone lucky enough to notice. And trees can support one another, quite literally. In closely spaced forests, the roots of different trees sometimes graft together underground, fusing into a single continuous system. When this happens, nutrients and water can flow freely between trees, even trees of different species. If one tree is damaged or stressed, its neighbors can help keep it alive by sharing resources through these grafted roots. It's a form of mutual aid, an insurance policy written in wood and bark, where the health of the individual is tied to the health of the community. In this sense, a forest is not a collection of individuals but a superorganism, a living network where every member contributes to the survival of the whole, where isolation is rare and connection is the norm, the default state of being. Birds aren't the only creatures that disperse seeds in forests. Mammals, from tiny mice to massive elephants, play crucial roles in moving seeds from one place to another. Squirrels bury acorns and forget where they put them, inadvertently planting oaks across the landscape. Bears eat berries and defecate the seeds miles away, often in clearings or disturbed areas where the seeds have a better chance of germinating. Even ants carry seeds into their nests, attracted by a fatty appendage on the seed called an elaeosome. They eat the elaeosome and discard the seed in their refuse pile, which is rich in nutrients, giving the seed an excellent start in life. The forest, in this way, relies on forgetfulness, on hunger, on the simple movements of animals going about their daily lives, each one an unwitting gardener planting the future. In deciduous forests, the changing seasons create a rhythm that everything else synchronizes to. Trees leaf out in spring, capturing sunlight and growing rapidly through the warm months. In autumn, they withdraw nutrients from their leaves, storing them in roots and trunk before letting the leaves fall. This dormancy allows the tree to survive winter when water is locked up, as ice and photosynthesis is impossible. But the cycle also creates opportunities for other species. Spring ephemerals, wildflowers like trillium and bloodroot, bloom on the forest floor before the canopy fills in, taking advantage of the brief window of sunlight. Insects time their life cycles to coincide with leaf out, when fresh, tender foliage is abundant. Every creature in the forest is attuned to the trees, to their rhythm, their seasonal pulse, their slow dance with the sun. The oldest trees often become keystone individuals, trees so important that their removal would dramatically alter the entire ecosystem. These matriarchs and patriarchs provide nesting sites for birds, forage for insects, shade for understory plants, and connections through the mycorrhizal network to dozens or hundreds of younger trees. They've survived fires, storms, droughts, and diseases, and their longevity is a testament to their genetic resilience. When an ancient tree finally falls, the gap it leaves in the canopy can take decades to fill, and the forest structure shifts in response. But even in death, these giants continue to give, becoming nurse logs, habitat for salamanders and beetles, slow-release reservoirs of nutrients feeding the next generation. Their legacy extends far beyond their lifespan, echoing through the forest for centuries after they've returned to soil. Some forests smell sweeter after rain, and part of that sweetness comes from actinomycetes, bacteria in the soil that produce geosmin and other aromatic compounds. These bacteria are essential decomposers, breaking down organic matter and recycling nutrients. The scent they release is earthy and clean, the smell of life renewing itself, of death transforming into fertility. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to geosmin. We can detect it at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion. Some researchers believe this sensitivity evolved because the smell of rain and moist soil indicated water sources to our ancestors, guiding them toward life-sustaining resources. So when you breathe in that forest after rain smell and feel a sense of peace, you're responding to an ancient signal, a promise written in chemistry that water is near, that life will continue, that everything will be all right. In temperate rainforests, like those of the Pacific Northwest, rainfall can exceed 200 inches a year. These forests are among the most biologically productive ecosystems on Earth, their trees growing to staggering sizes, their undergrowth lush and green even in the depths of winter. Sitka spruce, western red cedar, and Douglas fir tower hundreds of feet tall, their trunks draped with mosses and ferns that grow directly on the bark, drawing moisture from the constant mist and rain. The air itself feels thick with life, with the smell of wet wood and green growth. These forests are ancient, quiet, cathedral-like. To walk through them is to be humbled, to realize how small you are, how brief your life is compared to these towering witnesses who were here long before you and will remain long after. And forests are resilient. After a fire, after a clear cut, after a storm topples a swath of trees, the forest begins to heal itself almost immediately. Seeds that have been lying dormant in the soil for decades suddenly germinate, triggered by the sunlight that now reaches the ground. Fast-growing pioneer species like aspen and alder move in first, stabilizing the soil and creating shade. Slowly, over years and decades, the longer-lived species return: oaks, maples, pines. The forest regrows, not exactly as it was before, but as a new version of itself, shaped by what was lost and what survived. It's a reminder that ecosystems are not fragile museum pieces but dynamic, adaptive, constantly reshaping themselves in response to disturbance, always moving toward complexity, toward balance, toward a future that honors the past but doesn't cling to it. Take a moment here if you'd like. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. Feel the weight of your body against the bed, the softness beneath you. Your breathing is your own, steady and slow. There's nowhere else you need to be right now, nothing you need to solve or fix. The forest will keep growing whether you're awake or asleep, whether you're listening closely or drifting somewhere between. That's the beauty of it. Everything continues. Life goes on, patient and unhurried. And you can simply rest here, wrapped in these gentle truths, letting them carry you deeper into comfort, deeper into peace. The forest floor is a tapestry of decomposition and renewal. Leaves, branches, needles, bark, all of it falls and begins to break down, creating layers that ecologists call the duff. The top layer is fresh litter, still recognizable as leaves or twigs. Below that, partially decomposed material forms a spongy, fragrant layer. At the bottom, near the mineral soil, the organic matter has broken down so completely it's just dark, crumbly humus, rich in nutrients. This layering creates habitat for countless invertebrates, moisture-loving salamanders, and the mycelia of fungi threading through everything. The forest floor is not a static surface, but a living, breathing interface between the world above and the world below, a zone of constant transformation where death is indistinguishable from life, where everything that falls is caught and remade. Trees have evolved remarkable strategies to survive fire. Some, like lodgepole pines, have cones that remain sealed with resin until the heat of a fire melts it, releasing seeds onto the freshly cleared ground where they have little competition. Others, like giant sequoias, have thick, spongy bark that insulates the living tissue inside even when flames scorch the exterior. Some oaks and other hardwoods can resprout from their root crowns after the above-ground portion has been burned away. Fire in many ecosystems is not a disaster but a natural part of the cycle, clearing out undergrowth, recycling nutrients, and creating the conditions for certain species to thrive. The forest has learned to live with fire, to use it, to be shaped by it without being destroyed. In the Amazon, there are trees called strangler figs that begin life as epiphytes, growing on the branches of other trees. The fig sends roots down toward the ground, and once those roots reach soil, the fig grows more vigorously, eventually surrounding the host tree's trunk with a lattice of roots. Over decades, the host tree may die and decompose, leaving the fig standing on its own hollow column of roots, a tree-shaped structure with no central trunk. It's a slow and patient takeover, neither cruel nor kind, just one strategy for reaching the sunlight in a crowded forest. The strangler fig is a reminder that competition in nature is rarely a quick battle but a long negotiation, a gradual repositioning over years and decades, where persistence matters more than aggression. Certain trees produce allelopathic chemicals, compounds that inhibit the growth of other plants nearby. Black walnut trees, for example, release juglone from their roots and leaves, creating a zone around the tree where many other species struggle to grow. This reduces competition for water and nutrients, giving the walnut tree an advantage. It's chemical warfare, conducted slowly and invisibly, a strategy as old as plants themselves. But even allelopathy isn't absolute. Some plants have evolved tolerance to these chemicals, finding ways to grow in the shadow of the walnut, turning a hostile environment into a niche. The forest is full of these small dramas, these invisible struggles and adaptations, each one a thread in the larger fabric of the ecosystem. When you walk through a forest, you're walking on a thin skin of life stretched over rock. Soil, which seems so mundane, is actually one of the most complex substances on Earth, containing billions of microorganisms in every handful. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all of them busily breaking down organic matter, cycling nutrients, forming symbiotic relationships with plant roots. It takes hundreds to thousands of years to build just a few inches of healthy soil, and it can be eroded away in a single generation if the forest is removed. Soil is the forest's foundation, its memory, its wealth. Without it, nothing grows. With it, life explodes into abundance, diversity, resilience. To care for the forest is to care for the soil, to understand that what lies beneath is just as important as what towers above. And forests are places of profound quiet, but that quiet is not emptiness. It's fullness, layered and textured. If you sit still long enough, you begin to notice the small sounds, the trickle of water over stones in a nearby creek, the flutter of a moth's wings, the creak of a tree swaying in the wind. You notice the quality of the light, the way it changes minute by minute as the sun moves across the sky. You notice your own breathing, your heartbeat, the thoughts that rise and fall like waves. The forest teaches you to listen, not just with your ears but with your whole body, to be present in a way that modern life rarely demands. It's a kind of meditation offered freely to anyone willing to step off the trail, to sit down on a log, to simply be for a while. Many indigenous cultures around the world have lived in and with forests for thousands of years, developing deep knowledge of plant properties, animal behavior, and ecological relationships. They practice what's sometimes called traditional ecological knowledge, a sophisticated understanding passed down through generations. These communities often manage forests in ways that enhance biodiversity rather than diminish it, using controlled burns, selective harvesting, and other techniques that mimic natural processes. Modern conservation science is increasingly recognizing that indigenous land stewardship is not primitive or outdated but highly effective, that forests have been actively shaped by human hands for millennia in ways that were sustainable and respectful. The forest is not just a wilderness separate from people but a home, a partner, a relative deserving of care and gratitude. Coniferous forests, like the boreal forests that stretch across Canada, Scandinavia, and Siberia, are the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. These forests of spruce, pine, fir, and larch endure long, harsh winters and short growing seasons. The trees are adapted to conserve water and nutrients, with needle-like leaves that reduce moisture loss and waxy coatings that protect against cold. The boreal forest stores an enormous amount of carbon, much of it locked in the frozen soils and peat bogs beneath the trees. As the climate warms, these forests are changing, with permafrost thawing and trees growing further north than they have in thousands of years. The boreal forest is a quiet giant, covering vast stretches of the northern hemisphere, a green belt around the top of the world, breathing steadily, holding carbon, sheltering life in one of the planet's most unforgiving climates. Woodpeckers hammer on trees not just to find food but to communicate. The rapid drumming sound, resonating through the forest, announces territory and attracts mates. Different species have different drumming patterns, different rhythms, so that the forest becomes a percussion ensemble with multiple drummers playing at once. The woodpecker's skull is specially adapted to absorb the impact, with spongy bone and a thick skull that prevents brain injury despite thousands of strikes per day. It's a remarkable piece of evolutionary engineering, a body reshaped entirely around the need to bang its head against wood, to carve out homes in dead trees, to find beetle larvae hidden beneath bark. The woodpecker is a reminder that every creature in the forest has its niche, its role, its unique way of making a living. Epiphytes are plants that grow on other plants, usually trees, without being parasitic. In tropical forests, the branches of tall trees are gardens unto themselves, festooned with orchids, bromeliads, ferns, and mosses. These epiphytes draw moisture and nutrients from rain, mist, and decaying organic matter that collects in the crevices of bark. They don't harm the host tree. They simply use it as a platform to reach the light. Some epiphytes have evolved remarkable adaptations, like tank bromeliads that hold pools of water in their leaf rosettes, creating tiny aquatic ecosystems high in the canopy where frogs breed and insects live their entire lives without ever touching the ground. The forest, in this way, is three-dimensional, a vertical landscape where every surface is an opportunity, every branch a potential home. Lichens are slow but relentless. Some species grow at rates of less than a millimeter per year, yet they can colonize surfaces that almost nothing else can tolerate. They're among the first organisms to establish themselves after a glacier recedes, or after a volcanic eruption covers the land in ash. Lichens produce acids that slowly dissolve rock, contributing to soil formation. They also absorb pollutants from the air, which makes them excellent indicators of air quality. Where lichens thrive, the air is clean. Where they disappear, pollution has taken hold. In forests, lichens add texture and color, draping branches with pale greens, oranges, and grays, creating a visual softness that belies their toughness, their ability to survive where almost nothing else can. And then there's the sound of wind moving through different types of trees. Pines sigh, their long needles catching the breeze and releasing it in a soft, suzerain whisper. Aspens rattle, their flat-stemmed leaves trembling and clicking against one another. Oaks rustle with a deeper, fuller sound, their broad leaves catching and releasing the air in waves. If you close your eyes in a forest and listen carefully, you can identify the trees by their voices, by the particular way they interact with the wind. It's a language older than words, a music composed by physics and biology together, and it's always playing, always there in the background, a constant reminder that the forest is not silent but endlessly, beautifully articulate. In the winter, when deciduous trees have dropped their leaves, the forest takes on a different character. The architecture of the trees becomes visible, the branching patterns that were hidden by foliage now exposed against the sky. You can see farther into the forest, notice the shapes of trunks, the angles of limbs. The forest feels more open, quieter, stripped down to its essential structure. But it's not dead or sleeping in the way we might think. Trees are still alive, their roots still active in the soil, their buds already formed and waiting for the signal that spring has returned. Winter in the forest is a pause, a held breath, but it's not an absence. Life is simply waiting, patient and confident, knowing that warmth will return, that the cycle will continue as it always has. Tree roots rarely grow deep. Most forest soils have the majority of their roots in the top few feet, spreading outward rather than downward. This is because nutrients, oxygen and water are most abundant near the surface. A tree's root system can extend 2 or 3 times wider than its canopy, a vast underground web anchoring the tree and connecting it to its neighbors. In rocky or shallow soils, trees rely even more on their lateral roots and on the mycorrhizal fungi that extend their reach. The image of a tree with roots as deep as its trunk is tall is mostly a myth. The real structure is broader, flatter, more interconnected with the surrounding forest than we might imagine. Another reminder that trees are not solitary pillars but members of a community. Some seeds require specific conditions to germinate, a process called stratification. They need to experience a period of cold, or exposure to smoke, or passage through an animal's digestive system before they'll sprout. These requirements ensure that seeds don't germinate at the wrong time, in the wrong place. A seed that needs cold stratification won't sprout in autumn, when a young seedling would be killed by winter. A seed that needs fire won't germinate until after a burn has cleared competing vegetation and released nutrients into the soil. Seeds are patient, sometimes waiting decades for the right conditions. In the soil of a forest, there's a seed bank, a library of potential futures, each one waiting for its moment, for the particular combination of triggers that will wake it from dormancy and give it a chance to grow. Forests influence rainfall patterns downwind of themselves. The moisture that trees release through transpiration becomes part of the atmosphere, traveling with weather systems and falling as rain hundreds or even thousands of miles away. This phenomenon, sometimes called flying rivers, means that deforestation in one region can reduce rainfall in another, sometimes in a completely different country. The Amazon rainforest, for instance, generates rainfall that reaches as far as the agricultural regions of southern Brazil and Argentina. The forest, in this sense, is not a local feature but a planetary one, part of a global system that moves water through the air and across continents, connecting ecosystems that seem unrelated, proving that what happens in one forest matters to every forest, to every farm, to every city dependent on the rain that forests help create. Certain trees can live in standing water, their roots submerged for months or even years at a time. Bald cypress and mangroves have evolved specialized structures called pneumatophores or cypress knees, root extensions that stick up above the water level, allowing the tree to absorb oxygen even when the rest of the root system is flooded. Mangroves also filter salt from the water they absorb, excreting it through their leaves, which you can sometimes see crusted with white crystals. These trees stabilize coastlines, buffer storm surges, and provide critical habitat for fish, crustaceans, and birds. They grow in the liminal space between land and sea, between fresh water and salt, thriving in conditions that would kill most trees, proving that life finds a way into every niche, every challenging environment, every edge and boundary where others fear to root. And there are trees that communicate danger. When a giraffe begins browsing on an acacia tree in the African savanna, the tree responds by pumping tannins and other bitter compounds into its leaves, making them unpalatable. But the tree also releases ethylene gas into the air, a signal that drifts downwind to neighboring acacias. Those trees, even though they haven't been touched, begin producing their own defensive chemicals, preparing for an attack that hasn't arrived yet. The giraffes have learned to move upwind when browsing, or to skip past several trees before feeding again, staying ahead of the forest's chemical alarm system. It's an evolutionary arms race, each side adapting to the other's strategies, a dynamic balance that has been unfolding for millions of years, a conversation conducted in chemistry and behavior, in leaves and saliva, in wind and hunger. You're more than halfway through this journey now, and you've been so patient, so present. If your mind has wandered, that's perfectly fine. If you've drifted in and out of sleep, even better. That's exactly what this is for. The forest doesn't ask you to remember everything, to take notes, to stay alert. It only asks you to be, to breathe, to let yourself be held by the quiet knowledge that life is ancient and interconnected and so much larger than any single worry or concern. So rest easy. Let go a little more. We'll keep walking together, slow and steady, through the green cathedral, through the soft twilight, toward whatever rest you need. Mushrooms are only the fruiting bodies of fungi, the part that appears above ground to release spores. The main body of the fungus, the mycelium, lives underground or within rotting wood, spreading through the substrate in a network of thread-like hyphae. Some mycelia are enormous, covering acres of forest floor, living for centuries, all of it hidden except for the brief appearance of mushrooms after a rain. The mycelium is the true organism, patient and persistent, breaking down organic matter and forming partnerships with tree roots. The mushroom is just a temporary messenger, sent up to spread spores on the wind, then dissolving back into the forest floor as quickly as it appeared. It's a reminder that most of what's important in the forest is invisible, happening in the dark, beneath notice, in relationships and processes we only glimpse occasionally. Forests are carbon libraries, archives of ancient sunlight. Every molecule of wood in a tree was built from carbon dioxide pulled out of the air, combined with water drawn up from the roots, and assembled using energy from the sun. The tree is, in essence, solidified air and light, a physical manifestation of photosynthesis, of the alchemy that turns atmosphere into matter. When you touch a tree, you're touching transformed sunlight, holding in your hand something that was once intangible, diffuse, scattered across the sky. And when a tree dies and decays or burns in a fire, that carbon is released again, returning to the atmosphere, ready to be captured by another plant, another tree, continuing the cycle that has sustained life on Earth for billions of years. Birds and trees have co-evolved for so long that many trees depend entirely on birds for seed dispersal. Berries and fruits are advertisements, brightly colored packages of nutrition designed to be eaten. The seeds inside are hard-coated or bitter, able to survive the journey through a bird's digestive system. When the bird defecates, The seed is deposited far from the parent tree, often in a little pile of fertilizer, ready to germinate. Some seeds even germinate better after being digested, the acids and enzymes in the bird's gut scarifying the seed coat and improving germination rates. It's a partnership refined over millions of years, where the tree feeds the bird and the bird plants the tree, neither able to thrive without the other, another strand in the intricate web that binds the forest together. The smell of a forest is a chemical cocktail, a mix of volatile organic compounds released by plants, fungi, bacteria, and decomposing matter. Some of these compounds, like terpenes released by conifers, can improve mood and reduce stress in humans. They may have evolved to protect trees from pests, but they have the side effect of making forests smell fresh and inviting to us. Other compounds contribute to the earthy, loamy smell of the forest floor, the scent of decay and renewal mixed together. Walking through a forest, you're breathing in a pharmacy of plant chemistry, some of it medicinal, some of it just beautiful, all of it part of the forest's ongoing conversation with the air, with the animals, with everything that passes through its borders. Trees can form grafts not just with their own roots, but with the roots of neighboring trees, sometimes even trees of different species. When roots from two trees grow close together, they can fuse, creating a living bridge through which water and nutrients can flow. This interconnection means that a tree surrounded by others is more resilient than a tree standing alone. If one tree's roots are damaged on one side, it can draw on resources from the other side, or even from a neighbor. Forests are cooperatives, mutual aid societies, where individual survival is enhanced by community membership. The lone tree, iconic as it might be standing in a field, is actually more vulnerable, more stressed, less able to weather drought or disease than its forest-dwelling cousins surrounded by allies. And in the canopy of a rainforest, there are entire ecosystems that never touch the ground. Canopy researchers using ropes and platforms have discovered insects, frogs, and even small mammals that live their entire lives in the treetops, hundreds of feet above the forest floor. Some frogs breed in the water-filled bromeliads that grow on branches. Some insects have evolved to feed exclusively on canopy flowers or leaves. The canopy is warmer, brighter, and more variable than the forest floor, creating a completely different set of conditions, and therefore, a completely different community of species. The forest is not one world but many, stacked vertically, each layer with its own climate, its own inhabitants, its own mysteries waiting to be discovered by anyone brave or curious enough to climb up and look. When lightning strikes a tree, it often follows the moisture-rich cambium layer just beneath the bark, superheating the sap and causing the bark to explode off the trunk in long strips. Sometimes the tree survives, scarred but alive, its wound gradually sealed over by new growth. Other times the tree is killed instantly, left standing as a blackened snag. But even in death, it serves the forest. Lightning-struck trees are often among the first to be colonized by beetles and woodpeckers, their weakened wood easy to excavate for nests and food. Lightning is a force of disturbance, but like fire, it's part of the forest's natural rhythm, a reminder that chaos and destruction are also opportunities, that the forest is built as much by falling as by growing. Certain plants in the forest are what ecologists call indicator species, organisms so sensitive to environmental changes that their presence or absence tells you something important about ecosystem health. Lichens, as we've mentioned, indicate air quality. Certain amphibians with their permeable skin are sensitive to water pollution and climate change. If salamanders disappear from a forest stream, it's a warning that something is wrong, that some chemical or temperature shift has made the environment inhospitable. Indicator species are the forest's canaries in the coal mine, offering early warnings that give us a chance to respond before damage becomes irreversible. Paying attention to them is a way of listening to the forest, of understanding its language of presence and absence, abundance and scarcity. The concept of forest succession describes how a forest changes over time after a disturbance. After a fire or clear cut, the first plants to colonize are usually fast-growing, sun-loving species like grasses, shrubs, and pioneer trees. These early successional species stabilize the soil, add organic matter, and create shade that allows slower-growing, shade-tolerant species to establish themselves. Over decades, the composition shifts. The pioneers are gradually shaded out by longer-lived trees. Eventually, if left undisturbed, the forest reaches a state called climax community, a relatively stable composition dominated by species well suited to the local conditions. But climax is not an endpoint. Disturbances happen, and the cycle begins again. The forest is always in motion, always somewhere along the arc of succession, always becoming something new while honoring what it was. Some trees have evolved relationships with nitrogen-fixing bacteria, microbes that live in nodules on the tree's roots and convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form the tree can use. Alders, locusts, and some leguminous trees form these partnerships, and they're often found colonizing poor soils where other trees struggle. By fixing nitrogen, they enrich the soil not just for themselves but for the entire forest community, gradually improving conditions so that more species can move in. It's a form of ecological generosity, where one tree's adaptation benefits everyone, where the health of the whole is improved by the presence of these nitrogen-gifted species, quietly fertilizing the earth just by growing, just by hosting the bacteria that do this invisible, essential work. In autumn, as leaves change color, what you're actually seeing is the unmasking of pigments that were there all along. Chlorophyll, the green pigment that drives photosynthesis, breaks down as the days shorten, and the tree prepares for winter. As the green fades, other pigments become visible. Carotenoids produce yellows and oranges. Anthocyanins produce reds and purples. The tree isn't painting itself. It's revealing hidden colors, a final display before the leaves fall. The intensity of autumn color depends on weather, genetics, and soil chemistry, which is why some years are more spectacular than others, why some trees blaze crimson while others turn a soft gold. It's the forest's farewell to the growing season, a reminder that endings can be beautiful, that letting go can be a kind of celebration, and soil organisms outnumber the stars. In a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil, there can be more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Billions of bacteria, meters of fungal hyphae, countless protozoa and nematodes. This invisible multitude is what makes the soil alive, what transforms dead leaves and fallen branches into humus, what cycles nitrogen and phosphorus and all the other nutrients plants need to grow. Without this microbial workforce, the forest would choke on its own waste, nutrients locked up in dead tissue with no way to return them to the living. The soil is not a substance but a community, a bustling metropolis of microscopic life, and every tree, every plant, every forest depends absolutely on the ceaseless labor of organisms too small to see, too numerous to count, too essential to ignore. Root competition in forests is fierce but mostly invisible. Trees extend their roots outward and downward, searching for water and nutrients, and where one tree's roots meet another's, they compete for the same resources. But competition is mediated by the mycorrhizal network, which can actually redistribute resources more equitably, taking from trees with surplus and giving to trees in need. This doesn't mean the forest is a utopia without conflict, but it does mean that cooperation and competition are happening simultaneously, that the forest operates on a more complex logic than simple winner-takes-all. The strongest tree doesn't always thrive at the expense of all others. Sometimes, the whole forest is stronger when resources are shared, when the network buffers individual weaknesses, when survival is a collective achievement rather than an individual one. Some forests are defined not by the trees but by the understory. In temperate rainforests, the floor can be so thickly covered with ferns, mosses, and fallen logs that walking through requires constant navigation around obstacles. In tropical forests, the understory might be surprisingly open in old-growth areas, the canopy so dense that little light reaches the ground, limiting what can grow there. In pine forests, the understory is often dominated by shrubs that tolerate the acidic needles that cover the ground. Each type of forest has its characteristic layers, its particular balance of light, moisture, and nutrients that determines what grows where. The understory is the forest's secret garden, less visible than the canopy but no less important, home to the young trees waiting for their chance, the shade-loving plants that thrive in low light, the quiet creatures that prefer the dimness to the bright. Tree bark contains tannins and other compounds that make it unpalatable or even toxic to many herbivores. Some animals have evolved ways around this. Porcupines, for example, can digest bark that would sicken other mammals, and they feed on it during winter when other food is scarce. They leave distinctive gnaw marks on trees, sometimes girdling the trunk if they eat a complete ring of bark all the way around, which can kill the tree by cutting off the flow of nutrients between roots and leaves. The forest is full of these relationships, where one organism's defense is another's food source, where adaptation meets counter-adaptation in an endless evolutionary dance that shapes bodies, behaviors, chemistries over eons. Forests produce oxygen, but mature forests produce only slightly more oxygen than they consume. Young, fast-growing forests produce more, as their rapid growth incorporates lots of carbon and releases lots of oxygen. Old-growth forests are roughly in balance, producing oxygen during photosynthesis but consuming it during respiration, especially from all the decomposing matter on the forest floor. This doesn't mean old forests are unimportant. They store vast amounts of carbon, support incredible biodiversity, and regulate water and climate. But the idea that forests are the lungs of the planet is a bit misleading. Most of Earth's oxygen comes from photosynthetic plankton in the oceans. Forests are critical for countless reasons, but their role is more complex, more nuanced, than simply producing the air we breathe. They're part of a larger system, a global web of life support that spans every biome, every ocean, every corner of the living Earth. In some forests, especially tropical ones, there are trees called emergents that rise above the main canopy, their crowns bathed in full sunlight, exposed to wind and heat that the canopy trees below are sheltered from. These emergents are often home to eagles, hawks, and other raptors that use them as lookout perches. They're also lightning rods, literally, taking the strikes that might otherwise hit shorter trees. Emergents are pioneers of a different kind, individuals that have outgrown their neighbors, that stand alone above the crowd. They pay a price for their height, more exposure, more stress, but they also reap rewards. Unfiltered sunlight, first access to pollinators and seed dispersers that move through the canopy, a view that stretches to the horizon. And then there are the silent partnerships between trees and nitrogen-fixing plants that aren't bacteria but actinobacteria, a different group of microorganisms that also form root nodules and convert atmospheric nitrogen into usable forms. These relationships are less common than the bacterial ones, but no less important in certain ecosystems. The point is that the forest is built on collaboration, on organisms finding ways to exchange services, to specialize in tasks that benefit the community. No tree is entirely self-sufficient. Every tree is embedded in a network of relationships, giving and receiving, depending and being depended upon, part of a system so intricate that we're still discovering new connections, new pathways, new ways that life supports life in the green silence of the woods. How are you feeling? I hope you're comfortable wherever you are. Maybe you're already asleep, and these words are just distant echoes, gentle waves lapping at the shore of your consciousness. Or maybe you're still here, still listening, and that's wonderful too. There's no right or wrong way to experience this. The forest doesn't judge. It simply exists, offering itself to anyone who wanders in, asking nothing in return. So breathe deeply. Let your muscles go soft. Let the facts blur into feelings, into images, into dreams. The forest will still be here, patient and timeless, whenever you return. And for now, you can simply rest. Water moves through a tree from roots to leaves in a continuous column held together by surface tension and capillary action, a process called transpiration pull. As water evaporates from the leaves, it creates a vacuum that pulls more water up from below, like sipping through an incredibly long straw. In tall trees, this column can be hundreds of feet long, and the physics involved are remarkable. If the column breaks, if an air bubble forms, a condition called cavitation, that branch or root pathway can be disabled. Trees have evolved redundancy, multiple pathways for water to travel, so that if some are lost, others can compensate. It's a system under constant tension, literally, held together by molecular forces, by the cohesion of water molecules to each other, and to the walls of the xylem tubes through which they flow. Certain forest plants are parasitic, drawing nutrients from other plants rather than photosynthesizing. Mistletoe, for example, grows on tree branches, sending specialized roots called haustoria into the host's vascular tissue to steal water and nutrients. While mistletoe can photosynthesize a bit, it relies heavily on its host. In large enough infestations, mistletoe can weaken or even kill a tree. Yet mistletoe also provides food for birds and mammals, its berries an important winter resource. Even parasitism has its place in the forest's balance, its role in the web. Nothing is purely good or bad. Every organism is simply trying to survive, and its strategy, however it affects others, is part of the larger pattern, the larger story of life making a living however it can. Forests change the light. Sunlight entering the canopy is filtered, transformed from harsh white glare to soft green-gold luminescence. The chlorophyll in leaves absorbs red and blue wavelengths for photosynthesis, letting the green wavelengths pass through or reflect back. This green light, dappled and shifting as the leaves move in the breeze, has a calming effect on human psychology. We evolved in landscapes with trees, and our brains recognize the filtered light of a forest as a place of safety, shelter, abundance. It's one reason why walking in the woods feels restorative, why even just looking at images of forests can reduce stress. The light itself is gentle, forgiving, a visual softness that invites us to slow down, to look closely, to see the details we might miss in the harsh light of open spaces. Dead wood is anything but dead. A fallen log in a moist forest becomes a universe of life. Fungi colonize it first, their mycelia threading through the wood, breaking down lignin and cellulose. Beetles arrive to lay eggs, their larvae tunneling through the softening wood. Salamanders take refuge under the bark, hunting the invertebrates that swarm in the moist, decaying layers. Mosses and ferns root themselves on the log's surface, drawing nutrients from the decomposition. Over years or decades, the log softens, collapses, becomes part of the soil. It's a slow-motion transformation, death feeding life in the most literal way possible, the forest endlessly recycling itself, turning every ending into raw material for new beginnings, refusing to waste anything, honoring every organism's contribution by making sure it feeds the next generation. In some forests, there are trees called keystone species, whose presence or absence disproportionately affects the entire ecosystem. Oaks, for example, support more insect species than almost any other tree in temperate forests, and those insects feed countless birds, which in turn spread seeds and control other insect populations. Remove the oaks, and the forest's complexity unravels. Keystone species are the linchpins, the critical nodes in the network. Protecting them is essential for protecting everything else. They're not always the biggest or most obvious trees, but they're the ones the forest can't do without, the ones around which the rest of the community organizes itself, the ones that, by simply being there, make space and resources available for dozens or hundreds of other species. And trees respond to gravity, a phenomenon called gravitropism. Roots grow downward, toward moisture and stability. Shoots grow upward, toward light. If a tree is knocked over by wind or a landslide but survives, it will send up new vertical branches from the fallen trunk, creating a curved form that records the tree's history of disaster and recovery. These J-shaped, or elbow trees are common in forests with unstable slopes or frequent storms. They're visual records of resilience, proof that falling is not the same as failing, that a tree can be knocked down and still reach for the sky, still grow, still thrive, still contribute to the forest canopy even from an unorthodox angle, even from a position that seems, at first glance, like defeat. Certain forest sounds are so consistent they become part of the baseline experience of being in the woods. The creak of swaying trunks, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a crow, the trickle of a stream. These sounds create what soundscape ecologists call the biophony, the collective sound of living creatures, and the geophony, the sound of earth processes like wind and water. Together, they form the acoustic signature of a forest, a signature that changes seasonally, daily, even hourly. In spring, bird song dominates. In summer, insects add their buzz and hum. In autumn, the sound of falling leaves becomes noticeable. In winter, the forest is quietest, the soundscape stripped to wind and the occasional crack of a branch breaking under snow. Each season has its music, its voice, and the forest speaks in all of them. Some trees can heal wounds so effectively that, years later, there's almost no trace of the damage. The tree produces callous tissue, new growth that gradually covers the wound, sealing it off from pathogens. Over time, the bark closes over the injury, and the only evidence might be a slight bulge or irregularity in the trunk. This healing ability is one reason trees can survive for so long despite constant damage from storms, animals, and disease. They don't have an immune system like animals do, but they have chemistry and growth, tools to isolate threats and wall them off, to keep living tissue safe, to continue growing despite scars. It's a lesson in persistence, in the power of slow, patient repair, in the understanding that damage doesn't have to be permanent if you give yourself time and resources to heal. Forests filter air, trapping particulates, dust, pollen, and pollution on leaf surfaces and in the complex structure of bark and branches. Rain washes these particles to the ground, where soil organisms break them down or neutralize them. Urban forests, even small parks or street trees, significantly improve air quality, reducing asthma and respiratory illness in nearby communities. A single tree can remove dozens of pounds of pollutants from the air each year. It's an ecosystem service we rarely think about, the forest quietly scrubbing the air, making it cleaner, healthier, more breathable, asking nothing in return but the space to grow, the chance to stand and stretch its branches toward the sky, to leaf out each spring and do the work it's been doing for hundreds of millions of years. In some forests, you'll find trees with burls, rounded bulbous growths on the trunk or branches. Burls are caused by injury, stress, or viral infection, and they consist of tightly packed, distorted wood grain. Woodworkers prize burls for their complex, swirling patterns, but on the tree they're scars, signs of disruption. Yet the tree continues to grow around them, incorporating the burl into its structure. The tree doesn't discard the damaged part. It includes it, grows with it, makes it part of its form. There's something almost poetic in that, the idea that imperfection is not something to hide or cut away, but something to live with, to integrate, to carry forward as part of your story. Forest edges, where woods meet fields or roads, are ecotones, transitional zones with characteristics of both ecosystems. Edges tend to have higher biodiversity than the interior of either habitat, a phenomenon called the edge effect. More light penetrates at the edge, allowing different plants to grow. Animals from both habitats use the edge for feeding or shelter, but edges can also be places of vulnerability. Invasive species often colonize edges first. Predators may concentrate at edges where prey is more visible. Too many edges, created by fragmentation, can degrade forest health. The edge is a place of richness and risk, a boundary that's more like a membrane than a wall, permeable, dynamic, constantly negotiated by the organisms that live on either side. And finally, there's the phenomenon of crown shyness, where the crowns of some trees don't touch, maintaining a small gap between their canopies. From below looking up, you see a network of channels separating one tree's foliage from another's, like a jigsaw puzzle with space between the pieces. Scientists aren't entirely sure why this happens. It might prevent the spread of leaf-eating insects, or reduce damage from branches colliding in the wind, or simply be a result of mutual abrasion, each tree's movement wearing away twigs from its neighbor until a gap forms. Whatever the reason, crown shyness is beautiful, a reminder that even trees rooted and seemingly static are constantly interacting, constantly adjusting to one another's presence, constantly finding ways to coexist without completely merging, maintaining individuality within community. We're nearing the end now, but there's no rush to get there. You've been so patient, so open to these stories from the forest. Maybe some of them have stayed with you, little seeds planted in your mind that will grow later, in dreams or in quiet moments of reflection. Or maybe they've all blurred together into a general feeling of calm, of connection to something larger and older than yourself. Either way, it's perfect. You're perfect just as you are, wherever you are in this journey toward sleep. So take another breath. Feel yourself supported. Know that the forest is always there, waiting, quiet and green, whenever you need it. Some trees produce allelopathic leaf litter, leaves that, even after falling, continue to suppress the growth of competing plants. The chemicals leach from the decaying leaves into the soil, creating a zone where only certain tolerant species can grow. This extends the tree's competitive advantage even after the leaves have left the tree. It's a long game, a strategy that operates across seasons and years, where the tree shapes not just its immediate space but the space beneath it, the future composition of the understory, the identity of what will grow in its shadow. The forest is full of these long-term strategies, these slow campaigns where success is measured in decades, where patience is survival, where the tree that plans ahead is the tree that endures. Pollination in forest trees is often done by wind rather than by insects. Oaks, pines, birches, and many others produce vast quantities of pollen, clouds of it released into the air in spring, drifting on currents until some lands on a receptive female flower. It's an inefficient system compared to targeted pollination by bees or birds, but it works at scale. The tree doesn't need to produce nectar or showy flowers to attract pollinators. It just needs to produce enough pollen that sheer probability ensures some will reach the right destination. Wind pollination is ancient, predating flowers, and it's still the dominant strategy for many forest trees, a reminder that old solutions, simple solutions, are often good enough. That evolution doesn't always favor complexity when simplicity works. In tropical forests, many trees have what are called buttress roots, large, flared roots that extend up the trunk like fins, sometimes taller than a person. Buttress roots provide stability in shallow soils, anchoring the tree against wind and rain. They also increase the surface area for gas exchange, allowing the tree to breathe in waterlogged soils where oxygen is scarce. Buttress roots give tropical forests some of their iconic appearance, these massive, sculptural forms that seem almost architectural, as if the trees are cathedrals or temples rather than living organisms. They're a solution to the challenges of growing tall in wet, shallow soil, another example of the forest's endless inventiveness, its ability to shape itself to meet whatever conditions it finds. Forests can change the chemistry of rainfall. As rain falls through the canopy, it picks up nutrients, pollen, and dissolved compounds from leaves and bark, a process called throughfall. By the time it reaches the ground, the rain is slightly acidic or alkaline depending on the forest type, enriched with nutrients that feed soil organisms and plants. Rainfall in a forest is not just water but a dilute fertilizer, a delivery system for nutrients cycling from the canopy to the soil. Even the rain is part of the forest's metabolism, part of its circulation, another thread in the web of connections that bind everything together, making the forest not a collection of individuals but a single, breathing, interconnected whole. Some tree species are dioecious, meaning individual trees are either male or female, producing only pollen or only seeds, not both. Holly, ginkgo, and some willows are dioecious. This strategy prevents self-pollination and promotes genetic diversity, ensuring that seeds are the product of cross-pollination between different individuals. It also means that, for the species to reproduce, both male and female trees must be present in the same area, that the forest must maintain a certain level of diversity and proximity for reproduction to succeed. It's a strategy that ties the fate of individuals to the fate of the community, that makes isolation a death sentence and connection essential. And finally, forests are places of silence but also of memory. The old trees have witnessed generations of animals, waves of climate change, cycles of fire and regrowth. They don't remember in the way we do with thoughts and images, but they record it in their rings, in their shapes, in the genetic adaptations passed to their offspring. The forest is a living archive, a place where the past is written in wood and soil, and the relationships between species. To walk in an old forest is to walk through time, to be surrounded by witnesses to centuries or millennia of history, to be reminded that the world is far older than any human life, that we are latecomers to a story already deep in its telling, guests in a house that has stood for ages and will stand for ages more if we let it. And so we've come to the end of our walk together, through these quiet facts about forests, through the green shadows and the filtered light, through the root systems that connect tree to tree and the fungal networks that whisper beneath the soil. I hope you found something here that eased your mind, that helped you let go of the day's worries and tensions, that reminded you of the vastness and patience of the natural world. Forests have so much to teach us, if we're willing to slow down and listen. They teach us about resilience, about how to stand firm through storms and how to bend without breaking. They teach us about community, about the strength that comes from connection, from sharing resources, from supporting one another through invisible networks. They teach us about time, about the beauty of slow growth, of patience, of processes that unfold over decades and centuries rather than days and hours. In a world that often feels hurried and harsh, the forest is a refuge, a place where time moves differently, where success is measured not in productivity but in survival, in the quiet accumulation of years and growth. The trees don't worry about the future. They don't agonize over the past. They simply grow, season by season, responding to rain and sun, to fire and wind, adapting when they need to, enduring when they can, and always, always reaching toward the light. I hope tonight's journey has brought you some peace. Maybe you'll dream of walking through a forest, your feet soft on moss, the air cool and green around you, the sound of wind moving through branches like a lullaby. Or maybe you'll simply sink into deep, restful sleep, your mind quiet, your body relaxed, held by the knowledge that there's a world out there that doesn't need fixing, doesn't need managing, that simply exists, patient and beautiful, waiting for us to notice it, to appreciate it, to learn from it. If you've enjoyed this gentle journey through the forest, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel, leave a like, maybe share this video with someone who might need a peaceful night's sleep. Your support helps me create more of these meditative explorations, more bedtime science for anyone who finds comfort in facts delivered softly, in knowledge wrapped in wonder. But whether you subscribe or not, whether you remember any of these facts or not, I want you to know that you're doing just fine. You made it through another day. You found your way here to this quiet corner of the internet, to this space designed for rest and reflection. And now it's time to let go completely, to trust that sleep will come when it's ready, that you don't have to force anything, that you can simply be here, breathing, resting, safe. The forest doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't need you to be productive or impressive or even awake. It simply stands, patient and eternal, a green cathedral that welcomes everyone who wanders in, that offers shade and shelter and the quiet music of wind through leaves. And tonight, in your mind, you can return to that forest whenever you need to, can walk those soft paths, can rest against the trunk of an ancient tree and feel held by something larger and older and wiser than worry, than stress, than all the small anxieties that crowd into the spaces between thoughts. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed, supported and safe. The forest is still there in your mind, in the world, growing and breathing and being, and you are part of it, connected to it, held by the same earth, warmed by the same sun, part of the same vast, beautiful web of life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And now let yourself drift. Let the forest hold you. Let sleep come softly, like mist rising from the forest floor at dawn, like leaves falling in autumn, like rain on the canopy, gentle and inevitable and perfectly, perfectly natural. Good night. Rest well. The forest will be here when you wake, patient as always, waiting to welcome you back.